The morning sun cast long shadows across Maple Street as Marcus Williams began his regular route through the quiet suburban neighborhood. At 52, Marcus had been a sanitation worker for nearly 20 years, and he knew every house, every family, and every routine on his route. The familiar rumble of his truck echoed through the peaceful streets as residents went about their morning rituals, some waving from their windows as he passed by. Marcus took pride in his work. While others might see garbage collection as just another job, he viewed himself as an essential part of keeping the community clean and healthy. He knew Mrs. Henderson always had her bins perfectly aligned, that the Johnson family recycled religiously. And that little Tommy from house number 47 always ran to the window to watch the big truck with fascination. This particular Tuesday seemed no different from any other. Marcus had already collected from 3 streets and was making his way down Maple when he noticed something unusual. At house number 39, a modest 2-story home with a well-maintained garden, there was no garbage bin at the curb. This struck him as odd because the residents, the Morrison family, were always punctual with their waste disposal. As Marcus slowed his truck, he glanced toward the house and noticed all the curtains were drawn tight, which was unusual for the Morrison home. The family typically kept their front windows open during the day, and Mrs. Morrison often tended to her flower garden in the mornings. Something felt off. But Marcus continued with his route, making a mental note to check back if the bin wasn't out the following week. It was around 10:30 when Marcus was loading bins from the next street over that he heard it, a child's desperate crying. The sound was so heart-wrenching that he immediately stopped what he was doing and looked around. The crying seemed to be coming from the direction of Maple Street, growing louder and more frantic with each passing second. Marcus abandoned his current task and jogged toward the sound. What he saw made his heart race. A young boy, no more than 8 or 9 years old, was running down the sidewalk in his pajamas, tears streaming down his face, his small feet bare against the cold concrete. The child was running directly toward Marcus, as if the sanitation worker was his only hope in the world. The boy was thin, with unkempt brown hair and clothes that looked like they hadn't been changed in days. His pajama top was torn at the shoulder, and there were what appeared to be bruises on his arms. But it was the look in his eyes that struck Marcus most. Pure terror mixed with desperate hope, as if he had been running for his life. "Help me! Please help me!" the boy screamed as he reached Marcus, grabbing onto the man's work uniform with trembling hands. "They're going to hurt me again. Please don't let them take me back." Marcus immediately knelt down to the boy's level, his protective instincts kicking in. Hey, it's okay. You're safe now. What's your name, son?" "Danny," the boy sobbed, his whole body shaking. "Danny Morrison. I live at 39, but I can't go back there. Please, you have to believe me. They're not my real parents, and they hurt me every day." Marcus felt his blood run cold. The Morrison house, the same house where no garbage bin had been put out, where all the curtains were drawn. He had driven past this house hundreds of times, never suspecting that behind those walls, a child was suffering. "Danny, I need you to tell me exactly what happened," Marcus said gently, removing his work jacket and wrapping it around the boy's small shoulders. "Take your time and tell me everything." Through broken sobs, Danny began to explain. He told Marcus that the people he called his parents weren't really his parents at all. He had been living with them for over a year, but he remembered having different parents before, parents who loved him and never hurt him. The Morrisons kept him locked in the basement most of the time, only bringing him upstairs when they needed him to do chores or when social workers came to check on the house. "They told everyone I was their nephew," Danny whispered, his voice barely audible. "They said my real parents died in a car accident, but I know that's not true. I remember my real mom and dad. They would never have given me away." Marcus listened in horror as Danny described being beaten for the smallest infractions, being fed scraps of food, and being threatened that if he ever tried to run away or tell anyone, something terrible would happen to his real parents. The boy had been too scared to escape until this morning, when he overheard the Morrisons talking about moving to another state. "They said they were going to take me somewhere far away where no one would ever find me," Danny continued, his grip on Marcus's uniform tightening. "I knew this was my last chance. I waited until they went upstairs and broke the basement window. I've been running for almost an hour, hiding whenever I saw cars because I was scared they were looking for me." Marcus's mind raced as he processed what the boy was telling him. This wasn't just a case of child abuse. This was kidnapping, human trafficking, and who knew what else. He pulled out his cell phone with one hand while keeping the other protectively around Danny. "Danny, I'm going to call the police right now, okay? You're going to be safe, I promise you that," Marcus said, his voice steady despite the anger and urgency he felt inside. As Marcus dialed 911, he noticed a car slowly driving down the street, seeming to search for something. The car slowed as it approached them, and Marcus instinctively moved to shield Danny from view. When the car's occupants saw Marcus on the phone, they quickly sped away, but not before Marcus got a good look at the license plate. 911, what's your emergency?" The dispatcher's voice came through the phone. "This is Marcus Williams, and I'm a sanitation worker on Maple Street. I have a child here who claims he's been kidnapped and abused. He just escaped from house number 39, and I think the perpetrators might be looking for him right now." Danny's eyes went wide with fear as he heard Marcus mention the address. "That was their car," he whispered urgently. "They're looking for me. What if they try to take me back?" Marcus gave the dispatcher all the information he could, including the license plate number of the suspicious vehicle. The dispatcher assured him that police units were being dispatched immediately and instructed him to stay on the line and keep the child safe until help arrived. As they waited, Marcus tried to keep Danny calm by talking to him about normal things: school, friends, what he liked to do for fun. But Danny's answers revealed the horrifying extent of his isolation. He hadn't been to school in over a year, had no friends, and couldn't remember the last time he had played or done anything a normal child would do. The sound of sirens in the distance brought both relief and increased anxiety. Danny grabbed Marcus's arm again. "What if they don't believe me? What if the police make me go back there?" "That's not going to happen, Danny," Marcus said firmly. "I believe you, and I'm going to make sure everyone else believes you too. You were brave to escape, and you're going to be safe now." As the first police car rounded the corner, followed by an ambulance and what appeared to be several unmarked vehicles, Marcus realized that this was just the beginning. Whatever was happening at 39 Maple Street was about to be exposed, and he had a feeling it was going to be much bigger than anyone could imagine. Danny pressed closer to Marcus as the vehicles approached, and Marcus could feel the boy's heart beating rapidly against his side. "It's going to be okay," he whispered to the child. "You're the bravest kid I've ever met, and you're going to be just fine." But as Marcus watched the serious expressions on the approaching officers' faces and saw more official vehicles arriving by the minute, he knew that Danny's nightmare was far from over. In fact, for everyone on Maple Street, it was just beginning. Detective Sarah Chen had seen many disturbing cases in her 15 years with the police force. But something about the emergency call involving a kidnapped child made her stomach turn with unease. As she pulled up to Maple Street, she could see the sanitation worker kneeling beside a small boy wrapped in a work jacket, both of them surrounded by the growing presence of law enforcement vehicles. The scene was carefully controlled chaos. Officers were establishing a perimeter, while paramedics gently examined the child for injuries. Detective Chen approached Marcus and Danny, showing her badge and speaking in the calm, reassuring tone she had perfected for dealing with traumatized victims. "Hi, Danny. I'm Detective Chen. Marcus here tells me you've been very brave today. Can you tell me a little bit about what happened?" As Danny repeated his story to the detective, More details emerged that painted an even more disturbing picture. The boy described other children who had been in the house at various times, children who would disappear after a few weeks or months. He talked about strange visitors who would come to the house at night, people who would examine the children like they were merchandise. Detective Chen's blood ran cold as she recognized the signs of a human trafficking operation. She immediately radioed for additional units and contacted the FBI field office. This was no longer just a local kidnapping case. It was potentially a major federal investigation. While Danny was being examined by paramedics, Detective Chen gathered information from Marcus about his observations of the Morrison house. Marcus mentioned the lack of garbage bins, the constantly drawn curtains, and the unusual lack of normal family activity he had noticed over the months. "I drive past that house 5 days a week," Marcus explained. "I know every family on this route. But the Morrisons always seem different. I never saw kids playing in the yard, never saw normal family stuff. I just thought they were private people." As they spoke, more law enforcement arrived. FBI agents, social workers, and what appeared to be specialists in human trafficking cases began coordinating their response. Detective Chen learned that the license plate Marcus had spotted belonged to a vehicle registered to Robert Morrison, who had an extensive criminal history in 3 different states. The plan was forming quickly. While Danny was taken to the hospital for a thorough medical examination and to be interviewed by specialists trained in dealing with child trafficking victims, a team would approach the Morrison house. But as they prepared for the operation, Danny provided crucial information that changed everything. "There's a room in the basement," he told Detective Chen, his voice small but determined. "Behind the furnace, there's a hidden door. That's where they keep the files and the photos. And there's a computer there, too. Mr. Morrison is always on it, talking to people and showing them pictures." This revelation elevated the urgency of the situation. If there were indeed files and digital evidence in the house, the perpetrators might try to destroy it if they realized Danny had escaped and talked to authorities. The FBI took control of the operation, calling in their specialized cyber crimes unit and evidence recovery team. As the law enforcement teams prepared to raid the Morrison house, neighbors began to emerge from their homes, drawn by the unusual activity. Mrs. Henderson, the elderly woman from 2 houses down, approached Detective Chen with information that made the case even more complex. "I'm glad someone's finally looking into that house," she said quietly. "I've been calling social services for months, but they kept telling me that everything had been checked and was fine, but I knew something wasn't right." Mrs. Henderson explained that she had witnessed strange activities at the Morrison house for over a year. Cars would arrive late at night, staying for only short periods. She had occasionally heard children crying, but when she reported it, she was told that the Morrisons were caring for troubled foster children and that the crying was normal. "Last week I saw a man putting what looked like a child-sized bundle into a car trunk," she continued, her voice shaking. "I called the police, but they said someone had already checked it out and it was just furniture being moved." Detective Chen realized they were dealing with corruption within the system. Someone had been covering for the Morrisons, allowing their operation to continue despite multiple complaints from neighbors. This meant they couldn't trust normal communication channels and had to operate with extreme caution. The FBI team was ready to move on the house when they received an urgent call. The Morrisons' vehicle had been spotted at a storage facility across town, and agents watching the location reported that they appeared to be loading boxes and equipment into their car. The perpetrators were destroying evidence and preparing to flee. A decision was made to split the operation. One team would immediately raid the Morrison house, while another team moved to intercept the suspects at the storage facility. Detective Chen stayed with the house raid team, as her knowledge of Danny's information about the hidden room would be crucial. As they approached 39 Maple Street, the house appeared completely abandoned. No vehicles in the driveway, no movement behind the curtained windows. The FBI used specialized equipment to determine that the house was empty, before making entry. What they found inside was worse than anyone had imagined. The house was set up like a staging area for human trafficking. The main floor appeared normal, designed to fool casual visitors and social workers. But the basement revealed the true horror of what had been happening. Multiple small rooms had been constructed in the basement, each with a lock on the outside. These weren't bedrooms, they were cells. The rooms contained only mattresses on the floor, buckets, and minimal belongings. The smell of fear and desperation seemed to permeate the air. But it was the hidden room behind the furnace that provided the most crucial evidence. Inside, they found elaborate record-keeping systems documenting dozens of children who had passed through the house over the past 3 years. Photos, personal information, medical records, and transaction logs painted a picture of a sophisticated operation that bought and sold children. The computer Danny had mentioned was still running, and FBI cyber specialists immediately began extracting data. The system contained communications with buyers, suppliers, and other trafficking networks across multiple states and even international connections. This wasn't just a local operation, it was part of a much larger criminal enterprise. Among the files, they found Danny's real information. His name was actually David Thompson, and he had been abducted from a playground in Oregon 18 months earlier. His real parents had been searching for him desperately, never giving up hope that their son was still alive. But Danny wasn't the only child whose real identity they discovered. Files showed that at least 15 other children had been trafficked through this house in the past year alone. Some had been sold to other trafficking operations, some to individuals, and some had simply disappeared from the records entirely. Detective Chen found herself struggling to maintain her professional composure as she reviewed file after file of children whose lives had been destroyed. Each folder contained photos showing bright, happy children in their real homes, followed by documentation of their systematic abuse and exploitation. The raid team at the storage facility had successfully apprehended Robert and Linda Morrison, along with another man who appeared to be a key coordinator in the trafficking network. The storage unit contained additional computers, financial records, and evidence linking the operation to similar networks in 6 other states. As news of the arrests spread, Detective Chen received calls from FBI field offices across the country. The Morrison operation had provided a crucial break in multiple ongoing investigations into child trafficking networks. The evidence found in the house and storage facility would help rescue children and arrest perpetrators in several other states. Back at the hospital, Danny was slowly beginning to understand that his ordeal was truly over. Child psychologists and social workers were helping him process what had happened, while FBI specialists gently gathered information about other children he had seen and the people who had hurt him. The most emotional moment came when Detective Chen was able to tell Danny that they had contacted his real parents in Oregon. David Thompson's mother and father had never stopped looking for their son, had never given up hope, and were already making arrangements to travel to the state to be reunited with their boy. But as the investigation deepened, it became clear that the Morrison house was just one piece of a much larger puzzle. The network they had been part of was vast, sophisticated, and had been operating with apparent immunity for years. The corruption that had allowed them to continue their operation despite multiple complaints suggested that the investigation was far from over. Detective Chen stood outside 39 Maple Street as crime scene technicians continued to process evidence. The house that had appeared so normal from the outside had been hiding unimaginable horrors. But thanks to Danny's incredible courage and Marcus's quick thinking, those horrors were finally being brought to light. As she watched the evidence being carefully cataloged and removed, Detective Chen knew that this was just the beginning. The investigation would expand, more arrests would be made, and hopefully more children would be rescued. But she also knew that for every network they shut down, there were others operating in the shadows, waiting to take their place. The real question now was how deep the corruption went and how many other people in positions of authority had been allowing these operations to continue. As Detective Chen prepared for what she knew would be one of the most important investigations of her career, she couldn't help but think about all the children who were still out there, waiting for someone to save them the way Danny had been saved. The decision to evacuate and shut down the entire block came 12 hours after Danny's rescue, when FBI cyber specialists made a chilling discovery in the Morrison network's digital files. The trafficking operation had been using sophisticated surveillance equipment to monitor not just their own activities, but also their neighbors, law enforcement responses, and anyone who might pose a threat to their operation. Agent Rebecca Torres, head of the FBI's Human Trafficking Task Force, stood in the mobile command center that had been set up at the end of Maple Street. The discovery of the surveillance network had transformed what was already a complex investigation into a potential national security issue. The Morrison house hadn't just been a trafficking hub, it had been the center of a sophisticated criminal intelligence operation. "They've been watching everything," Agent Torres explained to the assembled team of federal agents, local police, and specialists. "Every house on this block has been under surveillance. They have files on every resident, their daily routines, their work schedules, even their personal relationships. This level of surveillance suggests they were planning something much bigger than just trafficking children. The surveillance system was far more advanced than anything they had encountered in previous trafficking cases. Hidden cameras and listening devices had been placed throughout the neighborhood, disguised as routine infrastructure or hidden in seemingly innocent locations. The criminals had been building detailed profiles of every resident, looking for vulnerabilities they could exploit. Mrs. Henderson, the elderly neighbor who had repeatedly called authorities about suspicious activities, had unknowingly been a primary target of their surveillance. The files showed that the traffickers had identified her as a threat and had been planning to either discredit her or eliminate her entirely. Other neighbors who had shown any curiosity about the Morrison house had also been marked for potential neutralization. But the most disturbing discovery was that the surveillance network extended far beyond Maple Street. The Morrison operation had been part of a larger conspiracy that included corrupt officials in local law enforcement, social services, and even the court system. The reason Mrs. Henderson's calls had been ignored wasn't just bureaucratic incompetence, it was active suppression by people who were being paid to protect the trafficking operation. Agent Torres authorized the immediate evacuation of all residents within a 3-block radius. The evacuation order was presented as a precautionary measure due to potential environmental hazards discovered during the investigation, but the real reason was far more urgent. The FBI had reason to believe that other members of the trafficking network were still operating in the area and might attempt to eliminate witnesses or destroy additional evidence. Marcus Williams found himself at the center of a media storm that he never could have anticipated. His simple act of helping a crying child had exposed one of the largest human trafficking operations in the region's history. News crews from across the country descended on the quiet suburban neighborhood, transforming Maple Street into a circus of reporters, cameras, and speculation. But Marcus's focus remained on Danny, or David, as he was learning to think of the boy again. The reunion between David and his real parents had been emotional beyond description. David's mother, Jennifer Thompson, could barely speak through her tears as she held her son for the first time in 18 months. "We never stopped looking," she whispered to Marcus when they met at the FBI field office. "Every day, every hour, we were searching for him. There were times when everyone told us to give up hope, but we couldn't. A parent never gives up hope." David's father, Michael Thompson, was struggling with a mixture of overwhelming joy at having his son back and devastating anger at what had been done to him. The family would need extensive counseling and support to heal from their trauma, but they were together again, and that was what mattered most. The investigation continued to expand as federal agents followed the digital trails discovered in the Morrison files. Within a week of David's rescue, coordinated raids were conducted in 12 states, resulting in the arrest of 47 individuals connected to the trafficking network. More importantly, 23 additional children were rescued from various locations where they had been held. Each rescue brought its own story of horror and survival. Some children, like David, were eventually reunited with their biological families. Others had been missing for so long that their families had given up hope or couldn't be located. A few had been born into the trafficking system and had no memory of life outside of it. The corruption within the local system ran deeper than anyone had initially suspected. 3 social workers, 2 police officers, a family court judge, and several staff members from Child Protective Services were arrested for accepting bribes to ignore reports of suspicious activity or to facilitate the placement of children with traffickers posing as legitimate foster families. Detective Sarah Chen found herself leading a parallel investigation into the systemic corruption that had allowed the trafficking operation to flourish. The web of complicity was staggering. Forged documents, falsified background checks, and deliberately buried investigations had created an environment where criminals could operate with virtual impunity. The evacuation of Maple Street lasted for 2 weeks, while federal agents methodically dismantled the surveillance network and searched for additional evidence. Residents were temporarily relocated to hotels and rental properties, while their homes were swept for listening devices and hidden cameras. The discovery that their most private moments had been monitored for months was traumatizing for many of the families. When residents were finally allowed to return to their homes, Maple Street was forever changed. The Morrison house stood empty, its windows boarded up and yellow crime scene tape still fluttering in the breeze. For many neighbors, the knowledge of what had been happening just houses away from their own families was a trauma that would take years to process. Mrs. Henderson, the neighbor who had persistently reported suspicious activities, became an unexpected hero in the media coverage of the case. But the elderly woman struggled with guilt over not doing more and fear about what might have happened if the traffickers had decided to target her more aggressively. "I knew something was wrong," she told a reporter from the local newspaper. "But I never imagined it was anything this horrible. Those poor children, I should have done more. I should have kept calling until someone listened." The case became a catalyst for major reforms in how reports of suspicious activity involving children were handled. New protocols were established requiring multiple agencies to investigate such reports, making it much more difficult for corrupt officials to suppress investigations. Federal oversight was increased, and a new task force was created specifically to monitor and investigate potential trafficking operations. Marcus returned to his regular sanitation route, but his life had been permanently altered by that Tuesday morning encounter with David. He received recognition from multiple law enforcement agencies and was invited to speak at conferences about community awareness and the importance of ordinary citizens taking action when they witness suspicious activities. But for Marcus, the real reward was knowing that David was safe and healing. The boy sent him letters and drawings, slowly rebuilding his ability to trust adults and form positive relationships. David's recovery would be a long process, but his resilience and the support of his family and professional counselors gave everyone hope for his future. The trial of Robert and Linda Morrison, along with their associates, became one of the most closely watched criminal proceedings in recent memory. The evidence was overwhelming, and the sentences were severe. Robert Morrison received life in prison without the possibility of parole, while Linda Morrison was sentenced to 45 years. Their conviction sent a clear message that those who exploit children would face the full force of the law. But perhaps the most important outcome of the case was the awareness it raised about human trafficking in suburban communities. The Morrison operation had succeeded partly because it had hidden in plain sight, operating in a neighborhood where people assumed such horrors couldn't exist. David Thompson, now 12 years old and living safely with his family in Oregon, occasionally thought about that Tuesday morning when he made the desperate decision to break the basement window and run for help. He often wondered what would have happened if Marcus hadn't been working on Maple Street that day, if the sanitation worker had been on a different route or hadn't heard his cries for help. In his therapy sessions, David learned that healing meant acknowledging both the horror of what had happened to him and the hope represented by the kindness of strangers like Marcus. His story became a powerful reminder that evil might sometimes flourish in the shadows, but it could also be defeated by ordinary people who chose to act with courage and compassion when it mattered most. The empty lot where 39 Maple Street once stood served as a permanent reminder of the children who had suffered there and the community's commitment to never again allow such horrors to hide in their midst. A small memorial garden was eventually planted there, dedicated to survivors of human trafficking and to the ordinary heroes who helped bring them home. Years later, David would return to visit the memorial, not as a victim, but as a survivor who had found his way back to safety through the kindness of a sanitation worker who refused to ignore a child's cry for help. The story of that Tuesday morning continued to inspire others to stay vigilant, to care for their neighbors, and to remember that sometimes the most important heroic acts are the simplest ones, stopping to help when someone desperately needs it.